Senator Kubasik.
Deputy Secretary, I want to have a look at the counts of Australian businesses collected by the ABS, if I can. Specifically, I'd like to turn to Table 5, business by employment size, range quarterly data, and I believe this is the set that was released on the 11th of February 2025.
Yes, and I don't have that particular document in front of me, but between Mr Seaback and I, I'm sure we can assist you with your inquiries.
Okay. As at the 30th of September 2024, how many small businesses were there in Australia?
So I'll ask Mr Seaback to speak in a minute, but I did just want to indicate that small business definitions are quite complicated. So
I'm just after the ABS data. What
yes.
they used in their data set.
Right.
So, yeah.
I'll ask Mr.
So,
Seaback.
according to them, how many in that data set that I specified, how many small businesses were there as at the 30th of September 2024?
Thanks. I'll ask Mr Seaback to assist.
Thank you.
I don't know if I have that table in front of me. So we are talking about the period. What period are you talking to, Senator?
So it's the quarterly data released on the 11th of February. So it's Table 5, business by employment size range. It's the quarterly data.
From the ABS.
I'm after as at 30th of September 2024, and then my next question will be 31st of December 2024. How many small businesses were there in Australia? So the first set, 30th of September 2024.
Well, I don't have that document in front of me, so I might, unless you are able to table it. I am aware of the ABS release count of Australian business entries and exits, which presumably is an aspect of that table. I can say that on the figures that I do have in front of me.
Sorry to interrupt, just to clarify, is there anybody here that does have that document that's able to table it?
Sorry, no, I don't have it with me.
What are you after? The ABS data?
Yeah, the Table 5, business by employment size range, the quarterly data for 30th of September 2024.
Yeah. I mean, ABS weren't called, as I understand it, to the committee. So Treasury don't represent ABS.
I'm aware of that, but I assumed that Treasury may have that data in relation to small businesses and how many there were.
Are on later if that's of assistance.
They are.
Senator Kubasik.
So just to clarify, Treasury don't have that information at hand.
Not at the table, no. Sorry, Senator.
Thank you. All right. I'll go to my next set of questions. You have no data on small business counts whatsoever.
On counts?
Yeah.
I do have some data on small business counts.
Okay.
So, for example, and this was an extract of some of the material that the ABS produced in February, as you refer to. So I've got accounts by financial year from 2021 through to 2024.
I was after the quarterly data for 2024, so that's okay. I'll come back to that. That's fine. I'll then go to some counts on the annualised employment range that came through in August 2024 on the 27th. It's, again, if you have this, which is the ABS data table 13A, counts of Australian small businesses. Do you have that?
I have an extract of that in terms of number of small businesses.
Wonderful.
And number of small business non-employing, but not, yes, okay.
Sure.
Sorry, Senator, just, yeah.
Well, let's see how we go. Is it correct to say that there were 297,164 small business births in the financial year 24?
In that context, have to be careful how we define that, because there are different elements. Each of the births and exits have two elements to it. So my understanding is that when you combine both births and exits in the context of those figures, there is a sizable net increase.
So we wouldn't be combining births and exits. So I'm just interested in the births.
So a number of births, let me just see. give me a second. Okay, so in 2023-24, there were a total, from our understanding of the figures, of 434,520 small businesses, including 297,164 business births.
Okay, so that was the answer to my question. 297,164 small business births in financial year 24, is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Is it also correct to say that averaged out on a weekly basis or divided by 52, that gives 5,695, close to 5,700 small business births every week in financial year 24?
I'll take your advice on that. I don't have a calculator before me, but that's presumably correct.
Thank you. Can you confirm for me what the total number of small business exits were in financial year 24?
So there were a total of 360,710 small business exits, including 286,955 business cancellations.
Okay. So is it Treasury's assessment then that there were more small business exits than there were births in financial year 24?
Well, and this goes to my point around the two types of entries and exits. They shouldn't be looked at in a mutually exclusive way.
Well, I'm referencing births.
So if you take births only...
My question is it the Treasury's assessment that there were more small business exits than there were births in financial year 24?
Our view is that there were more business entries than there were business exits.
My question is not about entries. My question is about births.
But my point is that you can't look at them in a mutually exclusive way. If you want to understand from a statistical perspective whether there were more births than exits, then you need to look at both figures. And the statistics say that there were at least 70,000 new small businesses at the end of 2023-24 than there were at the start of it.
Okay, so basically if I look at births, there were more exits than births, but you're telling me I shouldn't just look at births, I should look at entries as a total figure. However, Minister Collins referenced births as a figure, so you're saying that she shouldn't have been referencing births at all?
I don't know to what statement you're referring to for Minister Collins, but if that's the case, that's the case. There are two types of entries, two types of exits, and you need to look at birth if you want to understand the net impact across the financial year.
Well, I have referenced births. So she has referenced births alone in her release on the 3rd of February in relation to the release of Australia's first National Small Business Strategy. I've asked you a set of questions that would show that if we use births and exits, that there are more exits than births during that period. But you are telling me that I shouldn't use that data set because it's incorrect. So the very same set that the
It's not complete,
used...
Senator.
Sorry?
You're misquoting what I've said. I said it is not complete to look at those data sets in isolation. They need to be looked at together, both the entries and the two types of entries and exits, and the net impact of both is positive, around 70,000 new businesses.
So I understand that. So I understand properly the entries. So the births are brand new businesses, like brand new babies. Entries could be I was a sole trader and now I'm a company. Is that correct?
That would be reclassification.
So it's not an entry?
It can be. I might just refer to my colleague down the end of the table.
Sorry, would you mind repeating that?
Yeah, so if I was a sole trader and then I became a company, as an example, would that be classified as an entry under this data set?
So Kylie Burke, Assistant Secretary, Small and Family Business Division. Depends on the size of what that sole trader turns into. So essentially, as Mr Seaback was saying, there's two different classifications for entries and two different classifications for exits. So the best way to think about that, as you said, is births or new registrations, and then there's also cancelled registrations. There's also resumption and hiatus of business activity. So they're sort of the two categories that make up those data sets.
So on that basis, are the births the best way to understand brand new businesses that have started in Australia?
That would be brand new businesses.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if we're talking about brand new businesses in versus all businesses out,
So
that's okay to look at that number to get an understanding of how many small businesses, what the net effect is in Australia.
So births only is part of the entries of small businesses, so that's where you need to look at the two categories of entries and the two categories of exits to get the total number of changes in small business.
Okay, thank you. Are Treasury staff employed to work for ASBEFIO?
Senator Asbefio is the Ombudsman himself is a statutory appointee and independent of Treasury.
I'm aware, yeah.
But the staff who work for Mr Bilson are Treasury employees.
Excellent. Does the Treasury share the concern of the Ombudsman that small business is in decline?
No, Senator, we would not characterise our comments in the same way. He obviously is an independent person and can characterise that how he wishes, and that's fine. I think we would look at a range of factors related to small business conditions and assess that as a whole. It's not usually something Treasury would do, saying it's in decline or it's in a flourishing period. I think there are some challenging circumstances. We would definitely agree with that, facing small businesses, and there have been for some time, especially post-COVID. But that's a matter for Mr Bilson.
Okay. Does the Treasury consider the Ombudsman to be correct when he said that sole traders are less likely now than at any point since records began 18 years ago to make the leap to employing their first employee?
I'd have to check with my colleagues if they have any comment on that. I'm not sure we have assessed that statement, so I think we'd have to take that on notice.
So the staff that you have there would not have assessed the statement from the Ombudsman?
They may have done so to support Mr Bilson, but there's a little bit of a separation in we don't tend to direct his staff. That they work to him and to the senior executive in his organisation.
But they would work under the same guidelines that they would work within
yes, that's
for
right.
the Treasury, right?
That's
so
right.
They wouldn't have any different way of counting than they would in Treasury itself?
Not necessarily, Senator. It's just a different hierarchy and a different sort of reporting line.
So the outcomes, one would expect that if the numbers were done in Treasury itself versus ASBEFIO, they would be exactly the same?
Not necessarily, Senator.
Okay.
We may have undertaken them in a different way, so they don't need to consult us on every methodological initiative they undertake. But I would assume, as Treasury employees, they're undertaking that adequately and effectively.
They'd be working to the same standards?
That's right.
Correct. Okay, thank you.
Can I add? Actually, I might clarify a little bit. There is that. There are those Chinese walls, in a sense, between the Treasury staff working for the statutory authority or the statutory person, from a human resources perspective, and those sorts of things. It's all one and the same thing, but we do. They are tasked differently.
I understand. It was more around the processes.
So they do not publish to the same data quality standards as Treasury proper.
Okay.
And I can go to the ABS counts of Australian businesses. It said small business end of June 2023 was 2.52 million. Small businesses end at June 2024, 2.59 million.
Thank you, Minister. And my follow-up question in relation to ASBEFIO is the Ombudsman said that only 3% of self-employed businesses became an employing business in 2023 to 2024, which is a record low rate. Does Treasury have any view or any data on that, particularly around the current operating environment for small businesses over the last 1, 2 to 3 years?
Thanks, Senator. I'll ask one of the team if they are happy to comment on that. Just in the meantime, I might just correct also something or clarify something I said before. The staff in Treasury who work in the ASBEFIO are not representing a Treasury view. I'm not suggesting they're doing anything lesser or different, but they are not representing Treasury. They are supporting the SBFEO himself, which is perfectly fine. But we can often have a different view or a different set of analysis that we undertake as well, and that's kind of normalised in our system. But in the meantime, does anyone want to take that question?
I'll try and add a few comments to fewer employing small businesses. So taking on board that ABS data, I'm assuming that's what the Ombudsman's referring to as well.
Yes.
So do acknowledge that in that latest release of ABS data, there are around 32,000 fewer employing small businesses. But that needs to be looked in its historical context as well. Over 2020, 21, 22 financial years, which you would appreciate largely covers the pandemic period, there was a much larger than usual increase in the number of small employing businesses, up to 14% compared to 2% on average per annum. And much of this driven by businesses that reclassified from being non-employing to employing. The ABS.
So just so I understand, you're saying that the 21 to 22, the post-pandemic period.
Well, sort of from, let's just say roughly from 2020 to the end of the 2022
I think I
financial year.
misheard you. I thought you said that that represented good business conditions.
Well, so the period coincides with the provision of JobKeeper during the COVID pandemic, and you can read what you would like into that.
What I'm reading into it is that we currently have less employing businesses that we did in the pandemic.
It's normalised since the pandemic.
Right.
So we're just saying the pandemic was an exceptional period. You have to be careful about the data because many people suspended collection of debts. You know, there was a range of factors that applied, including JobKeeper and other that were aimed to ensure small businesses were supported through the pandemic itself. And so from a data and statistical point of view, using that as a normal period is not something we would normally do in a range of different contexts in Treasury, not just the small business context.
I would suggest that a lot of businesses closed down during that period. They didn't open up.
Yeah.
No, but they claimed that they had employees.
So, yeah, where they had employees, yeah.
They claimed they had employees. Okay.
Cassie, just for your benefit and the benefit of everyone, we're running an hour behind calling Fiscal Group, which is next. You still have questions. Just wondering about how much time you think you need.
I think about another 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yeah, is that okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator.
I'll try and ask as quickly as I can. Deputy Secretary, I'd like to turn to something which we discussed at the last estimates hearing on this committee on the 6th of November, and a bit has happened since then, so I think it's worth revisiting. Are you able to tell me how many business insolvencies there were in the December quarter of last year? So that's December quarter 2024?
Yes, Senator, I'll ask my team to support me on this one, but I just wanted to clarify, are you happy to receive information about business-related personal insolvencies as well as corporate insolvencies? Obviously, small businesses fit under both of those categories, and that's a more accurate reflection of the full gamut of the types of small businesses. So we have AFCA data relating to business-related personal insolvencies, and
I'd be interested in the ASIC data.
The ASIC data,
Yeah.
so that's related to corporate insolvencies.
Yeah.
Mr. Seaback or Ms. Burke, did you want to take?
Yeah, I can start off if you'd like. So if we focus on corporate insolvencies, the latest ASIC data indicates that the level of insolvency is above the immediate pandemic level and reached record highs in
I'm
raw
just after
numbers.
the number, thank you.
Yep.
I don't need the other information given we're behind.
Okay, well, in the calendar year to the end of 2024...
I was after the December quarter. My question was how many business insolvencies were there in the December quarter of last year?
I don't know if I have
Senator,
that
we
quarterly.
tend to carry financial year data or calendar year data because quarterly data is not necessarily reflective of the whole year. So we do have year data to the end of 24-25. We don't have quarterly data, and that's not something. I mean, we're very happy to take on a notice if you would like, but usually we aggregate that up. That's a more accurate indication across a year.
All right. Do you have an awareness then if the December quarter represented a record quarter for business insolvencies? Does anyone at Treasury have any awareness of that, or do we need to take that on notice too?
So we do have awareness of it, Senator, but I think as we talked about last time, in a level sense, something can be at a record high, but as a proportion of businesses, it cannot. I don't think we would have the latter calculated by quarter. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I
have a financial year and
we would have a
calendar
financial year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then how many were there in the calendar year then for 2024?
So for 2024, 13,451 corporate insolvencies, and we are aware that provisionally there were 726 corporate insolvencies in January.
Okay. And then given we can't rely on quarterly data for records, was that a record for a calendar year?
I believe so, in terms of raw numbers.
So yes, so now we're into raw numbers. So yes, it was a record for a calendar year.
But all these things,
Businesses overall is growing.
it's contextual.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
so
I
I think the percentage is actually the more useful. You know, insolvencies is a proportion of companies. Probably.
And Minister, if I can add to that. So the level of corporate insolvencies, and I think we said this last time, Senator, the proportion of the level of corporate insolvencies as a proportion of total companies was 0.39% in the calendar year 2024. This is lower than the long-term historical average of 0.41%, and indeed 0.47% if we exclude the COVID period, where there were around 50% less corporate insolvencies given what occurred during those 2 years.
I think that gives you the best kind of assessment because it's year on year over a period of time. It doesn't give you the outcome that you're after, I accept that, but that is the actual facts.
I'm actually after the data from Treasury, who are the people that work really, really hard to put these numbers together, and I'm sure they brief yourself and the Minister, and hopefully, I think they probably do brief the Prime Minister, but he probably doesn't read it. But that's another matter altogether.
I don't think that's unnecessary.
Well,
I would imagine the Prime Minister reads the most papers out of everybody in this building.
Well, there was some interesting information about small businesses on Q&A on Monday night.
I accept it's not the narrative you're after, but if you look at the data, and I'm not denying that there's some small businesses that are doing it really tough, which is why we've been trying to get support to them, like our energy bill rebates, which you opposed, and you know, to make sure that we are giving them a hand. But the data, when you look at it year on year, doesn't give you the answer you're after. As a proportion of companies, insolvencies under the Albanese government have averaged 0.26%, which is the lowest on record for any government.
Thank you. And I was after information from the experts rather than a political answer.
Well, no,
but I'll keep.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Senator Kovacic. I am appearing here as a minister at the table. I am able to add to answers or provide answers. That is essentially what estimates is about.
The data for January, was that the business insolvencies for January, was that a record for the month of January this year?
I wouldn't be able to tell you that. We'll take that on notice.
Okay. All right. Does Treasury share the view of Creditor Watch that insolvencies are at a record high and that will continue for the foreseeable future?
Sorry, what was your question?
Does Treasury share the view of Creditor Watch that insolvencies are at a record high and will be so for the foreseeable future?
So, Senator, I don't know that we have. Was that a particular statement that they've made? I'm not sure.
Yes, correct. Yes, yeah. On the 9th of February 2025, their CEO Patrick Coghlan said that given the depletion of buffers and higher sensitivity of small business revenues to the economic cycle, so small businesses would be particularly vulnerable to a further deterioration in economic conditions. And his words were that insolvencies are at a record high and will continue for the foreseeable future.
So, Senator, I don't know if we'd agree with that, but that's his language, and I don't think we'd do that on the spot. But obviously there are a range of different data and statistical releases that we watch, and that includes some of the things we've been talking about earlier with insolvencies and the like. So I don't think we would posit a view on what we see as the likely forward program. There are a range of likely forward trajectory for small businesses, but there are obviously a range of macroeconomic indicators and other things that Treasury watches very closely, and some of those actually are improving. So we would probably have something to say about that in in the macroeconomic space, which is not in my
I just
area.
wanted, before you continue, I actually want to correct. I actually misquoted. That wasn't Mr Coghlan, that was the RBA. My mistake. So the RBA said, given the depletion of buffers and high sensitivity of small business revenues to the economic cycle, small businesses would be particularly vulnerable to a further deterioration in economic conditions.
Yes, and I'd like to see that in the broader context, but I wouldn't sort of sit here arguing with the RBA's view on that. They're entitled to their view, but we probably would prefer to develop our own view.
So you don't necessarily...
Well, I think it's fair to say for the banks...
finished my
well, no, I can... You cannot direct who answers the question,
But I
Senator.
didn't finish asking the question.
Well,
think the
you
minister
put a
was on the
proposition from the
previous
RBA
question.
and you said, do you agree with that? And I think the
actually
point the
haven't finished
RBA was
asking
making
my
was that
question
in the
there.
event that if the economy deteriorates, that will have an impact on small business. I don't think anyone would disagree with that, which is why it's been so pleasing that we haven't had any quarters of negative growth. We've seen employment maintained and unemployment low. We're seeing interest rates come down and we're seeing wages going up. That's actually a very good thing for the economy and for small business. But the government does not agree with the proposition that insolvencies are at a record high. As a proportion of businesses, the facts do not support that claim.
Chair, may I finish
Senator-
my question?
Senator Kovacic, and this would be your last question, Senator Kovacic.
My question was, do I get to finish my last question and another one, or do I just get to finish my last question that I
You
didn't
just
get to finish?
combine your questions.
Well, they're two
We're
different
at
questions.
that 10-minute
It was, so my question was, does Treasury neither agree nor disagree with the RBA's position then?
Well, sorry, Senator, I find it very difficult to do either of those things without seeing the full context of that quote
Right, thank you.
and the way in which it was delivered and the context in which it was delivered.
I think
So-
my last question is a very
Chair?
quick one. Yep.
Chair, could I just add, because for full context, Ms Bullock from the Reserve Bank has said specifically about insolvencies, if you take it as a proportion of the number of businesses which is growing over time, it's not at historical highs. And if you look at the trend of insolvencies over time, we're not even back to where we were trend-wise pre-pandemic. That is a full quote from Ms Bullock from Senate estimates last year.
Senator, are you concluded? Senator
No, I had the last question.
Yeah, last question.
Yeah, go for it. Did you want to ask?
No, go to you.
Thank you. It's been over 3 months, specifically 112 days since that last estimate, and we've seen multiple records broken with respect to the number of business insolvencies, the lowest ever conversion of sole traders to employing small businesses, and a decline in the number of employing small businesses in the Australian economy than there were 34 months ago, despite record inflation. Migration. So I want to understand, does Treasury have concerns about the impact on small businesses were inflation to rise again above its target band by the end of the year?
So, as the Minister has said, Senator, small businesses are vulnerable to economic conditions in some ways much more than large businesses and obviously individuals. So, while I wouldn't say we have concerns necessarily, I would agree with the proposition that small businesses are vulnerable to changes in the economy and downturns in the economy will affect small businesses in some ways disproportionately.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kovacic. Senator